The sky over Dry Creek split itself open with the coming dusk, bruised purple, threaded gold, heavy with the silence that follows sorrow. Dust rode the wind in low swirls, curling like ghosts over the flat land. From the ridge, a single rider moved, slow as a prayer, her silhouette long and lonesome in the dying light. Eliza Jane sat tall in the saddle, though the wind needled her skin and the ache in her legs had settled in hours back. Her father's old hat shadowed her eyes, and her fingers, wrapped tight around the reins, bore the red marks of work done without complaint. She wasn't known for beauty, not in the way saloon girls painted themselves pretty. Folks called her sharp or stubborn more than anything kind. But she carried herself like a woman who had no interest in being saved. Dry Creek had turned on her slowly, like rust spreading under paint. After her father died and the debts came due, the town offered pity instead of help, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, hands that never reached her pockets. She learned quick that loneliness wasn't always quiet. Sometimes it laughed in her face. Wyatt Bell had been the one promise she thought might stick. A shopkeeper's son with hands too clean for fence work and a voice slick as oil. He spoke of Eliza like she was a project to be polished, something wild to be tamed. She'd said yes to him in a moment of weak-hearted hope, thinking maybe marriage was the ladder out of her shrinking world. But the church steps were cold that morning. Wyatt's voice shook not with nerves, but with something worse, disdain. "You don't belong in town, Eliza," he said, barely meeting her eyes. "You're too rough, too big for the place I'm going." She said nothing as he turned and walked away. Just let the silence sit beside her like an old friend. The pastor's wife fumbled through excuses. No one stopped him. No one stopped to see if she was all right. By sunset, she'd packed what little she had left and left the town behind. 3 days out, the trail ran dry. Water was low, hope lower still. That morning, she found her mare trembling, ears pinned back. The sound came just after, faint hoofbeats, dozens. Low whistles, not English. Not friendly. Eliza slid from the saddle and crouched low, heart pounding like hooves on hollow ground. They came through the brush like smoke, lean men with dark braids and painted faces. Navajo scouts, moving like part of the earth itself. One raised a hand. The others stopped. She didn't run. Knew better than that. Running was for prey. Standing was for fighters. One of them dismounted, taller than the rest, with eyes like obsidian, deep and watchful. He walked toward her slow, like she was a skittish horse. His hand didn't go for his weapon. He just looked. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. He pointed to her saddlebag, then to himself. A request, not a demand. She tossed it toward him. He caught it without flinching, unrolled it, and found dried meat and a tin flask. He took nothing more. Then, without words, he gestured for her to follow. She didn't. She stood her ground. He looked to his men. They stayed where they were, still as carved wood. He turned back to her and said the first word she'd hear from him. "Toya." It sounded like wind scraping stone. He pointed to his chest, then hers, then back to himself. She understood. He wasn't asking. He was claiming. Still, there was no violence in his movements, no rough hands. Just certainty. A warrior, but not a brute. She climbed back onto her horse and followed. Not because she was forced, because something in the stillness of him was louder than fear. They traveled through the night. Moonlight turned the land silver. Coyotes cried in the distance. Eliza said nothing. Toya said less. By morning, they passed the old mining trails, a place where men vanished and women were traded like cattle. She remembered her father's warnings about the borderlands, where law grew thin and hearts grew mean. But this was different. They stopped near a riverbank, where cottonwoods leaned over the water like old men whispering secrets. The rest of the band split off to scout. Toya offered her a piece of flatbread, a quiet peace offering. She took it with a nod. That night, they made camp by the fire. The stars above stretched wide, endless, cold, uncaring. Eliza lay with her back to the fire, her boots still on. She didn't sleep, but she rested. Toya sat on a rock nearby, carving something from a bone. She watched his hands, steady, careful. Warrior hands. Maker hands. She whispered, "You could have taken more than a bag." He didn't respond, but he paused, just a breath. The next morning brought smoke. Not from their fire, from far off. A town, maybe, or a ranch. Toya tensed, mounted quick, gestured for her to move. They found the wagon just before noon. A family, slaughtered. Burned wheels. Blood in the dirt. Buzzards overhead. Eliza covered her mouth. She'd seen death, but this was slaughter. Among the wreckage, a small girl crawled out from beneath a broken cart. Her dress torn, face streaked with ash. She couldn't have been older than 6. Eliza knelt low, arms open. The girl ran into them without a sound. Toya watched. His jaw clenched. Behind them, hoofbeats again, not Navajo. Not wild. 5 riders. White men. Guns drawn. Drunk or mad or both. That one's ours, one shouted, pointing to Eliza. Another spat. Savage stole her. Let's get her back. Toya stepped between Eliza and the riders. He didn't draw. Just stood. Eliza's breath hitched. She reached slowly for the rifle slung behind her. The lead rider laughed. Look at that. She don't want saving. Eliza stepped forward, voice cold as river ice. You didn't lift a hand when Wyatt left me in the dirt. Don't pretend I'm yours to rescue now. The girl behind her clung tighter. One of the men raised his gun. Toya moved faster than thought. Pulled a knife. Threw it low. The man's horse reared. He fell hard, winded and bleeding from the thigh. The others hesitated. Eliza cocked the rifle. Go, she said. Or bleed. They left. Spitting curses. But they left. After the dust settled, Eliza turned to Toya. You didn't have to do that, she said. He looked at her, eyes steady. You are not prize, he said, the words thick, foreign. You are brave. Then he turned, walked back to the girl, and knelt to offer her water. Eliza stood still, heart beating louder than the quiet. That night, she didn't sleep at the fire's edge. She slept closer, between the child and the man who didn't take, but protected. The sky above burned with stars, but it was the ground beneath her that felt safest. She didn't know where they were going, or what waited, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. And that, somehow, felt like the beginning. The days that followed slipped by like water over polished stone, quiet, persistent, shaping everything in their path. The land unfolded in shades of ochre and rust, mesas rising like forgotten gods under skies too big to belong to any one man. Eliza rode at the back of the small procession, the little girl, Sparrow, asleep against her chest, arms wrapped tight as roots. Toya led them, his figure always slightly ahead, as if carved out of the very land he walked. He did not look back often, but when he did, it was never with command, only assurance. Eliza had never been someone's burden before, nor someone's charge. She had lived between being overlooked and underestimated, and neither had given her the quiet comfort that Toya's steady silence did. He moved like a man whose power lay not in force but in restraint. And the more she watched him, the more she began to understand the gravity in his stillness, as though every word he didn't say held more weight than the ones others spilled too easily. They stopped by a slow river as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The Navajo camp welcomed them without surprise. Women with lined faces and eyes like polished stone helped Eliza down from her horse. One of them took Sparrow into her arms, whispering in a language that soothed like wind over wheat. Eliza, stiff at first, allowed herself to be led toward a ring of low shelters woven from wood and earth. She was not tied, not questioned, not treated like some prize to gawk at. Toya spoke with the elders, his voice low and respectful, and though she caught none of the words, she could hear the tone, not of ownership, but of guardianship. He had not brought her to display. He had brought her to protect. When the fire rose that night, shadows danced along the walls of the roundhouse. Eliza sat with a bowl of stew in her hands, unfamiliar spices warming her mouth and making her eyes sting for reasons that had nothing to do with flavor. Across the circle, Toya carved again, this time a small bird in a scrap of cottonwood. His fingers moved slowly, precisely, whittling away the excess to find the shape beneath. Sparrow curled beside her, already asleep, her tiny body coiled like a question never answered. Eliza shifted her gaze. You don't talk much, she said to the man across the fire, more to the space than to him. Toya looked up. In the firelight, his eyes reflected amber. Words are wind, he said softly, easier to hear than to hold. Eliza didn't answer, but she held the silence like a shared cup, no need to drink from it to feel its weight. In the days that followed, she worked, not because she was asked, but because standing still made her skin itch. She helped the women gather herbs, sort grain, strip hides. She learned to twist yucca fibers with her fingers, to listen without filling the air. The elder woman who had first welcomed her was named Ashkiese, she who remembers. Her hands were bent with time, but her voice was firm, and her eyes missed nothing. "You carry broken things inside," she said once, brushing Eliza's hair and threading small beads through it. "But they make no noise. That is dangerous." Eliza smiled, "A tight thing. Noise makes you easier to shoot at." Ashkiese nodded, understanding more than the words. "Then make your quiet strong." Each evening, Toya returned from patrol. He'd leave again with the sun, reappearing only when the sky bled orange. He never asked Eliza to stay, never gave her orders, but his eyes sought hers across every fire. Not as a man watching a woman, but as a soul watching another to see if she was still whole. One night, rain fell soft and sudden, pattering against the earth like the memory of tears. The others took shelter. Eliza remained outside, face tilted skyward, letting it soak her hair, her skin, her silence. Toya approached, his steps barely brushing the earth. "You do not run from the storm," he said, voice low. She didn't open her eyes. "Most storms have already passed through me." When she looked at him, she saw no pity, only recognition. And something else, something as gentle and slow as the first thaw of spring. "Do you miss your home?" he asked. She considered the question. "I thought I would. But maybe it was never really mine." He nodded. The rain softened, easing into mist. "Do you regret taking me?" she asked, not accusing, just seeking. "I did not take," he said. "I saw you were not safe. I chose not to leave you." It was the closest thing to tenderness she had heard in months. The next morning brought movement. Toya and 3 others ready to ride. "Raiders," he said, glancing toward the horizon. "Near the water trail. We watch." Eliza stood by the fire, her hands wrapped around Sparrow's small frame. "Be careful." He didn't answer, just looked at her a moment too long, then rode off into the dawn. That evening, a young scout returned alone, blood streaked down his leg. His face bore fear, not for himself, but for what he left behind. Ashkiese translated. "They are pinned, near the canyon rim. Too many to fight." Eliza's pulse thudded behind her ribs. Without thinking, she handed Sparrow to Ashkiese and grabbed her rifle. The elder didn't stop her, just placed a cool hand on her arm. "You walk into fire again." "I've done it before," Eliza said. "But this time, someone might care if I don't walk out." She rode a borrowed horse hard across the flats, the world narrowing to the rhythm of hooves and wind. By the time she reached the canyon edge, dusk was bleeding out across the sky. Below, chaos. 3 raiders. 2 of Toya's men down. Toya himself, standing between them and a fallen youth, blade drawn, breath heaving. Eliza aimed. One shot cracked the air, clean and sharp. The nearest raider dropped. The others turned, startled by the echo. She didn't wait. Rode down the slope like fire itself. Gun raised, scream lodged in her throat. Another shot. Missed. Toya moved then, fast and final. The knife found a throat. The last raider ran. And then silence. Eliza dismounted, legs shaking. She ran to him. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice raw. "I am here," she replied. "That's what matters." He looked at her, breathing hard. Then something softened behind his eyes, not weakness, but recognition. "You saved me," he said. She shook her head. "You were never mine to save. But I didn't want to lose you." They rode back under a night sky littered with stars, the air electric with something unspoken. Back at the camp, Sparrow ran into her arms. Ashkiese smiled without smiling. "And Toya?" He stood beside her, not touching, but near, always near. That night, Eliza didn't lie awake wondering where she belonged. She already knew. But deep in the canyon of her chest, a new question began to echo, quiet and persistent. Not, "Will he love me?" but "What if he already does?" Summer cracked open the days with heat thick enough to slow time. The earth gave off the scent of warmed cedar and sage, and the river ran low, curling in upon itself like an old dog settling to sleep. But for all the sun scorched, it also ripened. Moments, feelings, the hidden fruit of quiet hours spent beside someone who asked nothing more than your truth. Eliza rose before the camp most mornings now, her hands skilled and her shoulders strong. She knew the rhythm of the place like a second heartbeat, the creak of bentwood doors, the songs of the women as they ground corn, the footfalls of small children chasing one another barefoot through dust and laughter. Sparrow had found her voice again, soft but sure, humming to herself as she tied little bundles of dried sage. It surprised Eliza how much she'd come to love the silence. It wasn't absence anymore. It was space, space to breathe, to choose, to be. She still kept her rifle nearby. Habit, maybe, or warning. Not to them, but to the ghosts she'd carried from Dry Creek. Not all things stayed behind when you left. Some rode quiet inside you, waiting. Toya remained a steady, grounding presence. He didn't shadow her steps. He didn't try to protect her from her own strength. But he was there, in the ways that mattered most. He taught her words in his language, low and patient. She taught him the old lullabies her mother had once murmured in a cracked whisper, half forgotten now, except in the places grief had preserved them. When they spoke, it was mostly through doing, mending saddle straps, cooking side by side, gathering berries from the high ridge. Sometimes, in the heat of late afternoon, he would hum a tune she didn't know. And sometimes she would answer with silence that meant she understood. But peace, like rivers, bends toward change. One evening, as clouds gathered in bruised folds on the horizon, a scout brought news. A U.S. cavalry patrol, moving west. Too close. Too curious. A captain with a taste for conquest and coin. He'd been through these parts before, back when Toya was still a boy and Eliza's world was still a farmhouse on the edge of polite society. He'd taken things, then. Lives. Dignity. Memory. The elders gathered, their faces marked with the lines of old decisions. Ashki Isa spoke first, her voice soft but unshakable. We stay. We do not run from men who do not see us. But the others, younger, wary, argued. The cavalry had more guns. More reason to hunt than to ask. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She walked to the riverbank where the reeds whispered and frogs called into the velvet dark. Toya found her there, his steps so quiet she wouldn't have known he was near if not for the way her breath changed when he was close. Your hands shake, he said, not unkindly. I know what men like him do, she whispered. To women. To anyone who doesn't kneel. He didn't reply, just stepped beside her and looked out across the silver ribbon of water. I used to think strength meant being alone, she said after a while. Now I know better, but I don't know how to keep this. She didn't have to say what this meant. His eyes told her he knew. You do not keep a river, he said. You walk beside it. Sometimes you cross. Sometimes you rest in its arms. She looked up at him then, really looked. And in the stillness, something shifted, not like lightning, but like the slow turn of a wheel that had long been buried in the sand. The next day, the cavalry came. Not with guns blazing, not yet, but with smiles that stretched too wide and eyes that slid off the truth. There were 20 of them, and only one who spoke. Captain Malden, with gold thread on his shoulders and a smirk that reeked of certainty. He dismounted, all polite cruelty. We're just checking the edges, he said, loud enough for all to hear. Ensuring peace remains manageable. Toya stood before the camp, arms at his sides, body still as the stone behind him. This land is not yours, he said. Malden laughed. Oh, son, everything out here is either unclaimed or waiting to be corrected. Eliza stood beside the women, Sparrow's small hand in hers. She could feel her heart trying to crawl out of her ribs. She remembered that tone, the same one Wyatt had used when he told her she wasn't fit for town life. The same one that saw her as an object to tame or discard. Malden's gaze drifted across the camp until it landed on her. Well now, he said, eyes narrowing. I didn't expect to find a stray settler among the herd. Eliza didn't flinch. You with them by choice, miss? Toya stepped forward slightly. Malden's smile sharpened. Careful now, boy. Eliza took a breath and stepped forward too. I am with them, she said, voice steady. By heart. By choice. And if you think to drag me back to some world that let me bleed and didn't blink, you'll find I've grown teeth. A murmur passed through the patrol. Unease. Malden's expression faltered. Just a flicker. Keep your woman leashed, he said to Toya, turning his horse with a sharp pull. We'll be back. You can't squat forever. They rode off in a cloud of heat and dust. The camp remained still, tension heavy as a storm about to break. Toya turned to her. He will return. I know, Eliza said. So will we. That evening, as the camp sat quiet, Eliza gathered what she could. Herbs, powder, knives wrapped in cloth. Not for battle, not exactly, but for survival, for readiness. Toya watched her from a distance, then approached with 2 saddlebags. You plan to fight? He asked. I plan to stay, she said. He nodded, something like pride flickering behind his calm. They walked to the ridge together, overlooking the land as it blushed with the first touch of twilight. What if we leave? She asked. He turned to her. Would that make you safe? No, she said, but it might give us time. Toya reached into his pouch and pulled out the small carving, the bird he'd whittled weeks ago. He placed it in her hand. Sparrow, he said. She flies because she remembers how. Eliza looked down at it, then up at him. And what about the ones who've forgotten? They listen. To the ones who haven't. They stood close then, not touching, but close enough for breath to pass between them like promises unspoken. Below them, the river curved gently, veering east, disappearing into the folds of the earth. Where it turned, no one knew. But that it did turn, that it moved at all, was enough. In that moment, as the world hovered on the edge of stillness and storm, Eliza felt something break open inside her. Not pain, not fear. Hope, quiet and fierce, like roots splitting stone. And as night folded around them, she knew the final chapter had not yet come. But it was near. Morning came with no birdsong, only the hush before a reckoning. The air was too still, the wind curled under the mountains like it was holding its breath. In the camp, no one laughed. Even the children sensed something coming. Eliza stood beneath the sun-bleached pines with her hair braided tight, Sparrow's small fingers curled into hers. Around her, the people moved with purpose but without panic, as if they'd known this day was promised long ago, and all that remained was to meet it. From the rise above the camp, dust whispered of riders. Toya saw it first, a smudge on the horizon, riding low and fast. He stood without speaking, only narrowed his eyes. They return, he said quietly. Eliza didn't flinch. She had expected it. Still, the weight of it settled in her chest like iron. She turned to Ashki-Isa and pressed Sparrow gently into her arms. Keep her safe. Ashki-Isa didn't protest, just nodded once and held the child close. Eliza slung her rifle across her back, not as a weapon, but as a statement. She stepped beside Toya. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The patrol came hard and proud, their banners limp in the windless heat, their faces sharp with certainty. Captain Malden led them, his coat brighter than the desert sky, a smirk carving his jawline. He didn't ask permission to enter, just rode straight to the center of the camp and dismounted with theatrical ease. You had your warning, he said, and still you stay. Toya stepped forward, bare-chested, unarmed. We are not trespassers. We are home. Malden scoffed. Home is what law defines. And law says this land isn't yours. Eliza stepped into view. Her voice was calm, quiet as a stream, but clear as bell chime. Law didn't care when they burned my house, when they left me with nothing but scars. Law looked away when men like you took what you pleased. Malden's eyes narrowed. You're not one of them. I wasn't one of you either, she said. That's the truth you don't understand. Malden's gaze flicked over her, not with desire, but with calculation. You could leave with us. You're still white. You'd have a place again. I have a place, she said. He smiled, too cold. So be it. He signaled his men. Tension cracked like distant thunder. Eliza heard the rustle of movement behind her. The people of the camp, unarmed but not unready. A silence hung in the air like a blade on the edge of falling. And then, a single shot. Not from Malden's men. From the ridge. A rider appeared, one of the outer scouts, arm bloody, breath ragged. Bandits, he gasped. Following the soldiers. Looters, not law. Malden spun. What? 20, maybe more. Coming fast. For a single moment, the illusion of power wavered. Toya stepped forward. You brought the wolves with you. Panic scattered through Malden's ranks. They weren't prepared for a second enemy, especially not one without uniforms. Toya turned to Eliza. Go. Take the women. The children. Move north. I won't leave you. I will meet you, he said, at the place where the 2 rivers join. She looked into his eyes and saw no fear. Only promise. I believe you, she whispered. And then she ran. The retreat was quiet, swift. Women gathered what they could. Elders moved with grace that came from knowing every step mattered. Eliza helped Ashki-Isa onto a horse, Sparrow curled in her arms. The girl reached for Eliza, but Ashki-Isa shook her head. Her spirit is strong, the old woman said. Because yours is. Behind them, gunfire cracked. Toya had stayed. So had Malden. Eliza rode hard. Dust stung her eyes, but she didn't stop. She led them north, along the shallow basin where dry grass bent low. No trail, no flag, only memory and trust. It was nearly dawn when they reached the fork in the river, two streams winding toward each other like separated lovers finding their way home. She halted the group there, breath caught somewhere between faith and fear. They waited and waited until the sun crowned the ridge and set the water ablaze with gold. And then, hoofbeats. Toya rode from the trees, his face streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes alive. Behind him, only two of Malden's men remained, and neither carried their colors anymore. He dismounted without a word and walked to Eliza. She ran to him, arms catching around his shoulders before she even knew she'd moved. I promised, he said. His arms around her were not fierce but sure. Not to possess, to return. Sparrow squealed from Ashkese's arms and ran to them, pressing herself between them like a flower pushing through stone. Eliza dropped to her knees, held the child close, tears trailing down her cheeks like the softest rain. They stayed that way for a long time. Later, the camp reformed by the riverside, not with ceremony, but with calm. They were not broken, only changed. Malden was gone. No one asked what had become of him. Toya stood beside Eliza as they watched the sky turn copper. This place, she said, voice low. It's not what I imagined. No, he said. It is more. She turned to him. What now? He looked down at her, fingers brushing her wrist. Now we build. Eliza smiled, not wide, but real. You once said you didn't take me, she murmured. But you did. Yes, he said, but only your fear, not your fire. They stood together, wind threading through their hair. The river curled at their feet, reflecting a sky that seemed too wide to name. And somewhere in the stillness, in the hush after all the storms had passed, Eliza heard the sound of her heart, steady and whole. The warrior had taken her once, not as spoil, but as sacred, and in return, she had given him not obedience, but trust. This was not a story of conquest. It was a story of two broken halves, daring to believe that love was not the end of war, but the reason to survive it. And to you, reader, wherever you are, may you find your rivers turning. May you find a place not where someone keeps you, but where someone sees you. Like, comment, and tell me, where are you watching from? Let the story live on in your hearts. Until the next fire is lit.